I'd like to begin this episode by telling everyone who's listening in what this is about. Deborah and I will be having a chat about the impact of COVID-19 on theatre and the arts, and we're looking, and this entire series is about getting global perspectives about what it is like for artists locally, internationally, and what the arts will look like. And I'd start this off with a small introduction so that everyone knows who our esteemed guest is. Deborah is a performance maker, performer, lecturer, and director whose bold, highly visual and physical works use multiple theatrical languages to investigate gender, culture, and contemporary issues. She is the Artistic Director of Tashmadada, based in Melbourne, which is a contemporary arts company committed to bringing together practitioners as well as providing a forum for discussion about the arts. And here we are. Her most recent major works include Unhoused, which she directed, designed, and co-created with an ensemble of mature ex-homeless women. Medea, Kaddish for the Children, a visual, visceral, feminist reimagining of the classic Medea story. And Kaboom, Stories from Distant Frontlines, a promenade performance stroke installation about memory and war from the women's point of view, for which she interviewed ex-soldiers from global conflicts. Deborah studied in Japan with Tadashi Suzuki, trained in the work of Etienne Decroux, and Rasa Boxers with Richard Schechner. She was a regular sessional lecturer for many years at La Trobe University, University of Western Sydney, and University of Wollongong, where her roles included undergraduate teaching, supervision, course design, and direction of production. She completed a Master's in Performance at Victoria University and her practice-led PhD at La Trobe University. Deborah, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Pleasure, absolutely. Yeah.
And speaking of La Trobe University, I believe that's where you met Professor Saumya Linage. Am I right?
That's right, absolutely right. So I was teaching there, and I was actually also doing my PhD at the same time that Saumya was doing his PhD. He was there for a few years. I wasn't his supervisor, Dr. Rob Conkey was. But my first real encounter with Saumya was I was teaching a subject called cross-cultural performance. And there were 3 sections to it. And for one section, I was teaching Suzuki and the other section Decroux. And then we invited Saumya to come in and teach his particular form of Asian theatre practices. So he took part actually in my Suzuki classes, and he was very good, let me say. And I watched him as he did his teaching, which was so interesting, which was based on, I thought, his own sort of particular Sri Lankan style of training. And from there, basically the relationship formed. And we really bonded because there were some very strong similarities in the style and the physicality of the practices. And I didn't take part in his, but I watched every class that he taught, and it was fabulous. And from there, we created this relationship, basically a friendship and a mutual respect, I suppose, of each other as artists and as teachers.
And Saumya is the reason why you came down to Sri Lanka last year as well. That's how Deborah and I went. Deborah and I met. She conducted a workshop, an introductory workshop to the Suzuki method for 4 days last year in June, which is where I met Deborah, and it was the most mind-blowing workshop I've been a part of in terms of, I never really had made that mind-body connection with my lower body until we did that. We did that workshop, and my biggest takeaway from it was developing your inner sensibility when it comes to that internal sensibility when it comes to performance.
Yes.
And when was it that you decided to work with Saumya on that and bring it here? How did it work?
And the idea was, he had said he'd really like me to come in because he had experienced the Suzuki in the classes in Melbourne, the University at La Trobe, that I taught. And he said, I'd really love you to come and teach Suzuki because in the university and basically in Sri Lanka, no one has taught Suzuki before. Yeah. And he recognized the power of it all. And as you said, it connects in the mind, the body, the internal sensibility, the lower body, and all those sensibilities. So that's how it happened. And then because of what I think the incident that happened in Sri Lanka, it was curfews and we weren't sure, but then we all agreed, yes, let's do it because it's important to do. And so that was how it all came together. And there was originally going to be with the art camp with Dr. Peter Tate, who's a writer as well. She was going to come, and together we were going to write a project that came out of the Suzuki, which hopefully will still happen. As it happened, because with the Suzuki work, we use text. And often when you're working with Suzuki, it's usually Chekhov or Shakespeare or something of such gravitas. And over the years, I've been using text that maybe I've, in terms of rehearsal, that maybe I have been engaged with in rehearsal or in other ways to take into classes, take into rehearsals. And for the Sri Lankan workshop, we used some of the text that was extracted from Peter Tate's writing. She'd written this beautiful script. And just because you only use a little section, and as you will understand, because you mix the text with the very strong physical work and can be painful. It's a very short section. So we used her text in the extracts of her text for the training. And the thing that I found with the performers, I had a large group. We did pretty much all day, 10 till 4 every day, which is quite long in this work. It was, there seemed to be a very good engagement from the Sri Lankan performers and understanding of being able to embody this type of work. I had the whole script, the whole text. It was a beautiful poetic text. And I extracted bits to put it together to create a paragraph, which is used in the training. And the interesting thing, it was all about very sort of a relationship with Sri Lanka, actually. That's what the story came from, and life and death and, the nature of life and humanity. When we started using it in the training, it was really interesting in English. There was, the group itself were incredibly strong, incredibly physically strong and powerful and have this internal fire. When it came to the text in English, of course, it was hard to learn and more difficult. So then I suggested, look, you know what, let's translate it into Sinhalese because that makes sense. So once it was translated into Sinhalese, I suggested let's keep one line only in English. But once it was translated into local language, it was incredibly powerful. The way it was delivered, the way it was integrated into the physical work. And it was so exciting to see that sense of the physicality and the text coming together in this way. I did always used to laugh at everyone because there was one line which we kept in English, which was, you probably can say it, I can't feel my body. You probably will never forget it. Was only English line. So I love the group because the group was really strong and very focused and very still and did the exercise strong. And then all of a sudden came the line, I can't feel my body. And I'd laugh every time in a nice way because you were amazing.
For sure.
Because the line was all of a sudden, I can't feel my body. And again, back in the local language. So it was funny. And of course I can't feel my body because of course it can be quite painful, especially in the very beginning. But it was a very beautiful, so I'll always remember that moment. And hopefully if I come back, I will remind you of that moment. We'll go back to that text just so we can relive it.
I mean, learning from you, knowing that, this is learning from the student of the master itself was, it's a very rare opportunity for artists to be able to learn from, the creator of the form itself. And I just want to know, what was that experience like studying in Toga with Suzuki himself?
Life-changing, really life-changing. Wow. So my relationship with Suzuki, I did do a bit of Suzuki in Sydney before I went to Japan with a practitioner named Nigel Kellaway, who had also, before everyone kind of, well, before a few people went there, had trained with him, and it was incredible already. The company I belonged to, which was called On Track Theatre, was invited to Toga Festival to perform in the festival, which was incredible. While there, you know, of course, you're part of the festival, and Suzuki is very welcoming, and you start to create a relationship different from already, you know, if you just come as a student. He doesn't accept that many, but, you know, for the summer school. So I had that relationship already. And then I stayed on to do like the 1 month every day, except for 1 day a week training with him, which was, as I said, life-changing in performance life. I mean, of course, in life as well, but as a performer, it made sense to me in so many different ways. And I felt it had connected with gaps that I didn't really know were there, or things that I, you know, had basically, there was something missing I couldn't explain, and this did it for me. And the beauty of it is it's very formalized, and I think that's why. And so learning from him, he's this very quiet master in some way. So we'd be training with also the Suzuki company into, you know, in the same room at the same time, but you're always split into groups. And so it would be us and then the company. So with us, you know, he'd be really watching and very particular and very tough. Of course, with his company, he'd be very, 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 very tough. But, you know, not with this sort of sense of ego. The whole idea was to create a performer of a higher level, to ignite that inner fire within the performance, to create, to push you to your limits, not to push you in a bad way where we often think about, you know, gung-ho. He used to call it the G.I. Jones method or way of approach. No, it was all about pushing you, because as human beings, we are capable of more than we think we can do. And often the mind stops us and becomes hard. But then, oh, I can't do it. And then, you know, he used to say, well, if that's what it is, don't be a performer. As performers, we need to be extraordinary. Yeah, the sense of the extraordinary, exciting performer, the sense of, and this goes back to Japanese theatre, but the sense of possession of the actor. And I particularly engage with that. I mean, when I was young, from the age of 3, I had done classical ballet. And I do think that kind of, there is an alignment between the two, of course, for different outcomes, different artistic purposes, but in the idea of formality, creating, finding an individuality. So with both, and he often talks about it as well, the classical ballet, but in both of these training methods, you know, there are, you know, ballet, you've got this are very formalized, everyone does the same thing. But someone can go like this, you know, reach their hand out, you know, here we go. And this next person can do it, but then this other person does the same thing physically, but it's just engaging and powerful to watch. Same with the Suzuki method. So with Suzuki work, training you, everyone's doing the same. It could be stomping, whatever it is, a focused walk. You're all doing the same, but because of the individual human being, we do it in our own way. And when you connect to the sensibility, which is our own personal sensibility, someone can just be focused and, you know, you have everyone still, for instance, and focused, but one person just, takes you to them. What is that? Yeah. And that's what this work ignites. So that's why it was extraordinary. And then I continued on with him. I actually was at his classes in the last, he decided that he didn't want to teach anymore. He was sick of teaching us, everybody, the beginners. And so he invited people from around the world, people who had trained with him before, for his final masterclass, which allowed us then to teach the work. You know, so this continuous training, it was extraordinary. At that time, we used to get calls at 2:00 in the morning, and everyone used to get up, and we used to have to go around in the area, the kitchen area, around the table, and he'd just be talking about his method, talking about life, talking about theatre. I mean, I've got copious notes of his talking. It was amazing. And that's where, in fact, you know, there were these special magic moments of hearing about the philosophy. It was really special. Yeah.
But I'm sure there were a lot of things that he planned on doing. But then with this epidemic, or with the pandemic rather, you know, there were a lot of things that came to a halt. And I wanted to know, where is Deborah Leiser-Moore right now in her work? Yeah.
good question. So yeah, there are a number of things this year which have been cancelled, or should I say postponed. Now we're hoping this, the second part of the training in Colombo at the University of Visual and Performing Arts will continue, as will the project. I see it as a pause rather than a full stop. Some things, have been full stop.
Right. However, what are you working on? Yeah, sorry.
Oh yeah, no. So however, I had just two major things in my working now in terms of creative projects. One of them I had just finished, which was this piece Unhoused with the mature ex-homeless women, as a piece I directed. It did really well in Melbourne, and it had a whole lot of buzz around it. And, there were a couple of gigs that we were hoping for this year that got cancelled or, as I said, postponed. However, and we started, meeting up again with these women. It was a very powerful group of women. So with this, I don't see this as a finished project. I see this as, okay, we've got this pause, we're still in contact. As soon as we can start meeting again, of course, we will, because it's this incredible group of women. And I have, we might make a documentary out of it, which is an interesting thought in terms of what's happening now. So instead of this lockdown and COVID and whatever going, oh, you can't do this and this, I see it as an opportunity to go, well, okay, I look at it as a reset. I feel like we're on this reset button. And I've got a few things I'll say later about, the nature of the human spirit, which I think this time we are in now, we can look at it in two ways. We can go, it's terrible, 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 or it can actually be used as a chance of a reset and a reigniting of our creative juices and spirit. So I personally see it in that way. So this piece, Unhoused, I am hoping, and we will reignite it in many ways, because also in this piece in particular, we're talking about homelessness, and we're talking about particularly older homeless women who've always been under the radar. And unfortunately, with the aftermath of COVID-19, the numbers of homelessness, internationally is going to be bigger than ever it was. So I feel even more so this piece will be relevant. We need to hear from these individual women. These are fantastic stories. They're not poor me, as the women themselves said. We don't want to do pity porn. This woman who's like 78 the first time she has ever performed. They did a beautiful job, and you can see a little kind of trailer on my website. But no, I think it would be relevant because unfortunately, after what's happening now, there's a lot of job losses, as we know, the economy, and there'll be more experiences of homelessness. That's another one. That's one. Another piece, so there's that piece, and that's still going. Another piece I had been working on was with a younger dancer, or maybe mid-age dancer, who we started again working on a new piece that we'd actually performed together. Now, we had a development of it in November last year, and it started to find itself. And interestingly, it's about identity and don't pigeonhole me. That's the nature of the piece. It's called Oedipus. So we've going, we possibly have a performance next year, and we had a whole trajectory for it, being in the room together and all that, which we can't do now. So, but interestingly enough, and I think the world is interesting in how it unfolds. And, in part of our original development, we talked about what if, because it's all about pigeonholing and identity, and what happens if we did this performance where we are in different spaces but performing together. Right. So what we are intending to do, and we haven't had time yet, but our next stage of development is with the wonderful outside eye named Luke George. And my colleague I'm working with, his name is Israel Oloni, and he's basically based in Sweden. He's got a company there. So again, it's international, even though he's here at the moment. But we do want to follow up. We thought, that thread of idea emerged at the end of the first development. What happens if we, during this time where we physically can't be in the same space, what happens if we push that idea outwards? And let's see what happens. So what we're planning to do from June is giving each other some tasks that are done individually in our own spaces, because that was part of the idea anyway. How do we create when we're not in the same space? Well, how do we create a performance together? I mean, eventually we will be in a space, but, we'll talk about that. We'll look at that. We'll use it. We'll use the opportunity, and this is what I'm getting at, to we can go or we can say, okay, this is an opportunity to work in other ways. So we're going to use this opportunity to go, let's push that part of the idea out. Let's create tasks for each other. Let's develop the thing. Okay, not in the same room, but that could be interesting. We wouldn't have done that if it hadn't been for this.
Sure.
So, yeah, those opportunities happen that you would never have, like out of this sort of terrible time. Other ways of thinking can happen. I think creativity, can happen in different ways. And sometimes that can be a gift. We wouldn't have thought of that, but we have to solve a problem. And as artists, we need to create. And we create. That's what we do. We're constantly solving problems. And this is a big one. But in a way, the level of creativity can be even more, it can be greater.
Definitely. So, I think I was in my research and, on this topic of like sort of adapting your practice in these situations, right? I did come across certain articles which said that the Australian government in particular, unlike say the Canadian government or the German government, right, is, they have certain criteria when it comes to funding. And there are many artists who haven't been able to secure funding. Although there's this 2020 Resilience Fund in place, which has three arms of creating, adapting, and also just as stopgap relief as well. So do you have any comments on that? What is the actual situation?
Yeah, look, I have to say in Australia, we probably are luckier in many ways than a lot of other countries. Being an island here has helped us contain the virus. So we've got very small incidences and we're starting to open up. In terms of funding, they have come up with these, Australia Council's come up with this Resilience Fund, which we're waiting to hear about. And it's really about people who've been affected. I have a little worry because what they've also done at the same time is, because usually we have funding rounds, the next one was meant to be 2nd of June for future work, so it takes a few months, and there would have been work that you would have done end of the year into next year. That's closed. Fellowships, all the other ones closed, so the priority is on the resilience. I wonder, it could be not a problem, but my fear was a bit about the short-term nature of that. We'll see. We'll see what happens with the federal government coming in. But these resilience funds can be really good because they can help. At least, like for instance, if we get ours, that will give us some money to continue this work with the one I was just telling you about, which we'll probably do anyway. Arts Victoria, the Victorian government, each state government seem to be also offering help, which is great. Right. So there is a lot of support. We also, the government itself has this JobKeeper, job seeker. Unfortunately, this is a big problem with creative artists who work generally as casuals and project to project, where there's no real, very few companies that have part-time or full-time contracts. And as artists, you're not eligible because you're a casual, so you can't prove, so it is a little tricky at artists in terms of the wider funding fall between the gaps. Okay. So it's a little tricky, but we'll see. The resilience funds are fabulous. And Creative Victoria, all the kind of state ones, which are there to help artists. And there's been a lot of writing about it as well. But so it's a bit of a, it's on the government, the sort of federal kind of overall funding, but then there's particular artist funding.
Yeah, for sure. You also see, many solo artists, and also there were certain musical theatre performers who are performing as you've seen, right? You've seen there's a surge of productions being broadcast on YouTube with the means of, getting donations in so that, the artist can survive. But how sustainable do you think that is?
No, I don't think sustainable, really. I don't think it is. I think there needs, and that's the other thing I think maybe comes out of, or what's happening now. As I said, it's like a reset because we've been working, and I'm not sure in other places, but probably not so dissimilar. But, most people work in the arts project to project. Years ago, when with the company I went to Toga with, to Suzuki's festival with, we were I was on a contract. I was on a full-time contract for the 4 years I worked for them. I was getting paid a weekly salary. That doesn't exist anymore for companies, especially for smaller performance companies. Doesn't exist. So it's interesting because I think now this sort of sense of it sort of shows the gaps there have been and the difficulties there have been for artists up until now. Whether or not, and whether or not they take that on and decide, actually, we need to look after the artists. This is what artists are fighting for. And in a way, this is a great case. There's some wonderful articles written about it. In fact, today, Yaron Lipschitz, who runs Circa Theatre, wrote this wonderful article about, wait a minute, let's look at what the arts, we're here isolated, locked up, we're watching Netflix, you're reading books, you're looking at, whatever, you listen to your music. What is that? That's the arts. And Circa itself, he said, for every $1 that the government puts in, we make $10. So we again, the opportunity idea, look at this as an opportunity, hopefully, to go, well, actually, artists need to be looked after in a more sustainable way, because what's been happening up until now is not sustainable. This is a bit of a stopgap at the moment, not sustainable. I'm a little bit, sort of the people doing things, their work online and showing them, I think it's actually not sustainable either. I don't think it's a way to go, because that's not the live arts. So it's a matter, we are at a time, it's a crisis point. It's like in theatre, you have a point of crisis, point of change, leads to change. I think that's where we're at now. We've got to lead to change in how we regard artists. Art here in Australia, it's not necessarily the fabric of society like in Europe. You look after your artists. Although I gather there that's been also not as strongly as it used to be, years ago. But it'll be interesting to see what happens, whether the voice of the artists, which have been great and wide and loud, will be heard. We need more sustainable ways of living.
Considering the sort of nature of this particular virus, right, when it comes to the fact that, it has to do with keeping your distance. I read an article where, say, if it is like a 2,500 seater auditorium, right, now with the measures that they'll have to take, you can only let in something like 800 people at the most, and this kind of situation, while it is unprecedented, I really wonder what do you think? What do you think theatre, in terms of the audience and actor sort of that sort of relationship, what do you think it's going to look like in, say, a year? Do you have an inkling as to what that might be?
Obviously thinking a lot about that, and I did write some notes about that. The virus isn't going to always be there, but it is a chance to rethink. The big sort of theatres like the art centres, who get really good funding anyway, I think, this is a chance to go, well, actually, there are different ways of doing things, rather than sitting all together like that. We need to rethink about how we're going to have that audience performer relationship. I'm a big one for I believe, this is my belief, that people love live theatre because of the human contact. We need that. What are we craving for now? We're craving for the hugs, for the human contact. It will happen again. Let's face it, it will happen again, and slowly. Of course, in the beginning, there'll be fear, and we need to negotiate that, but it will happen again. I did want to, I think theatre is an ever-changing, beast, really. Artists are they're creative. That's the whole creative spirit, to kind of work out, how do we deal with this? How do we create that human contact, that humans in the room together in this particular situation? Already, when we can't be in the room together, there are ways of working out. Once we open the doors, maybe it'll be, already different types of theatre have been happening,
Sure.
Intimate theatre where you have a one-on-one. These are in the smaller theatre. I'm not talking about the big, art centres. But if you look at festivals, theatre's not just about that anymore. What are the best experiences? They're experiences. But I do believe that we'll find a way. And I think, audience will come back to the theatres, come back to the performers, because we want that live experiences. We want live experiences. And we want it. And I think that's the other thing. We want experiences more and more. Before the COVID-19 and all the lockdown, people actually have been creating work that responded to what audiences wanted, or, different ways of working where they are actually it's not just the audience sitting here and the performance happening here and they're disengaged. No, I mean, since a long time, a while now, there's Punch Drunk, or I can go back to La Fora Still Bounce. I mean, I went to their work where you're in there and that you're in the performance with them and you're engaging with them in different ways.
Very much, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's will be extended. I mean, my piece, Kaboom Story, which I took to Alice Springs and to Georgetown Festival, it was interesting in different spaces. An audience were in the room with me, and they experienced it. I think that kind of theatre will get bigger, actually. I think that will expand because there'll be different ways that we'll engage with our audiences. But we will. I mean, I think, when people say, oh, theatre's dead, I so don't believe that, because if that was the case, why has it been going on since, Greek theatre? I mean, how long has theatre been, it's always been part of the human experience, always, in so many different ways. We are going through a change, and that creative spirit it's part of it's a part of us as human beings. We have that creative spark. We want the content. We want those as audiences. They want to be transported. They want that. They want it. We need it. We need that kind of that engagement with the human art, with the arts, and with the human beings, with other humans. And I do believe. I mean, I was going to say, in terms of the arts and the creative spirit, it made me think of a book which I've got here. It's called Sacred Fire. And the reason why I wanted to mention this, because I'm not of this doomsday, I believe the creative spirit will, rise like the phoenix again. I don't think it's gone away, to tell you the truth. But the interesting thing about this book, which I've got here, and I can actually show you, is this book here. It was edited by this woman named Deborah Miller, was this amazing creative writer and teacher who's not around anymore. But the thing about this book, which was written by this rabbi in the Warsaw Ghetto. So Warsaw Ghetto, during the Holocaust, the worst human experience ever. We think we're bad. I mean, that was, it was one of the lowest time in history. Yeah. And here he is, a rabbi in the ghetto. But every day he wrote a page. I mean, he was talking about the Torah, which is the book. But every day he hid and he wrote. And he didn't write about the evil that was going on around him. He wrote about the creative spirit, and he wrote about the human beings and the nature of hope and the nature of when someone reads this after after the war, with this sense of, yes, it's going to finish and we will rise. And the beautiful thing, when the ghetto was razed to ashes, nothing left, this, he had hidden it. The pages of this book were found with his handwriting, because he wrote in it, when someone will hopefully publish this when I'm after the ghetto, after the war. It was found, again, like the phoenix to the ashes, coming out of the ashes. It was found, and it has now been published and edited, and it's this beautiful time. And the reason, it's this thing of like, well, he didn't talk about the evil, which he could have done. He kept the creative spirit happening every day, kept him alive for a while, until he finished this book. He discussed about how, as humans, we need to keep going. We need hope. We need to keep creating. And here's this book that really has come out of it. It literally was found in the ashes of the ghetto. I find that, I think that's, I think that's where we are now. We're going to come out. We're going to find our hope, and we're going to create.
Definitely. You see so much of creation on social media, with this new TikTok videos, and people creating little sketches and all those things.
But yeah.
And I would agree that the creative spirit isn't really dead, but I imagine, as it is for the two of us and for other people in the industry, now that everything is at a standstill, it is just a question of, okay, now what do I do next? How do I adapt? How do I, not create something cheap? You know what I mean? Like, is that there is that as well.
Yeah, that's a really important thing, and that's my worry. They're talking about creating something cheap, and I worry about and I might be, in trouble for saying this, but some of the rehearsal or people filming in their homes, I find that a little bit of a worry, because it's, instead of going, we don't have to keep producing, they got to get something out of, got to get something out. And the level of, I like the level of it is cheaper than not cheaper just in cost, but the artistic value, I shouldn't even say that. Artistic value is a very difficult thing to say, but, it's more of a panic response.
Right.
Rather than I want to create something. We don't always need to be producing to be artists. We have ups and ebbs and flows, and this is a time to work out what it is. And we can create in so many different ways, to rethink. We don't need to this panic to kind of keep and want to produce and get your work out there. It's
right.
I worry about that, and I think it cheapens, not in the monetary sense, but in other ways. That's the only thing I worry about. But and so I don't actually, when you say things are stop, what do I do now? Twyla Tharp always said, what she says, stop waiting, just get down to work. That's in her latest book. She talks about stop waiting. Here she is at 78 years old, still going. And I think that is one of the best things as artists that anyone, but as artists, we need to kind of stop waiting, just get down to work. Doesn't mean producing something, but just do your daily practice. Just do the things you need to do as a creative artist. It's that is the creative spirit. Yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
I'll just add in there while you're looking,
Sure.
In terms of using this time. I looked, when you'd asked me to kind of think of a poem or something that inspired me.
Yeah.
Well, there are some things. However, I also looked, next to my bed, in terms of books that, either had been given to me that I've always wanted to read. And I've written my list of the books next to my bed, which is what a perfect time to read these books, to kind of be inspired by others' writings. And I have this list here, and I can read it out to you. It's this very bizarre, eclectic list of books I have.
Yeah.
But, when you to think of like, what do I do now? There is so much. But I can read it out to you if you like while you're looking for the questions.
Yeah, please do.
So the books next to my bed are Twyla Tharp's Keep It Moving, which is where that quote came from. John Berger, Ways of Seeing, an old classic, which I just picked up not long before the lockdown. R. Crumb's Kafka, a book about Kafka, which is all sort of animation type thing, cartoon, which was given to me at present, and I haven't had a chance to even look through until now. Leonard Cohen's The Flame. Robbie Arnott, Flames, he's an Australian writer I've always wanted to read, and it was suggested. Ella Whelan's What Women Want, Fun, Freedom and the End of Feminism. Controversial, and wanted to read that as well. This one was given to me, Judith Rosenberg's The Golem and the Wondrous Deed of the Maharal of Prague, which was just given to me for my birthday, and it's its other version of The Golem. Stefan Zweig's The Burnt Candelabra. Robert Lutkin's The Everlasting Sunday. He's a young Australian writer, very different from everything else. And then Judith Molina's Poems of a Wandering Jewess, which is, I'll have something to read out later, and I have a little anecdote about her. But I just went, oh my God, when you asked me about, well, one, what you're saying now, and then about reading, I go, wow, look at this weird eclectic mix. But it's so exciting to be able to time to engage in all those different types of world, be inspired by them, fed. It's a time to be fed, I think, now. We don't need to stop or go, oh, I have nothing to do. Let's be fed, let's be inspired. The creative is always there.
Yeah. I think, there are just comments so far. So I did post a question on the thread now. If anyone has any questions, then they can ask. But I did actually come across a quote, which I think is directly in contrast to the quote you just mentioned to me, which is, which of course, this was this Canadian director's response immediately after the pandemic struck, but what he said was, to cancel a show goes against every instinct that artists have ingrained in them. That old adage, the show must go on, has been wiped away, and it's heartbreaking. But from this interview, what I can tell is, that it while it is heartbreaking, doesn't mean that that's the end.
No, it doesn't mean the end.
Yeah.
And also, why? Yes, of course, it's heartbreaking. We've all been. I think every artist I know has been heartbroken because well, can't come to Sri Lanka and Croatia, all out, and the shows and how, it is heartbreaking. At the same time, maybe it's a time for us to, and I don't disagree with that, and I feel that. At the same time, is it a way? Well, there are different ways of doing things, or it's a postponement. It's a reset. It's a time for us to think. We're always, I feel like we're always on the go, thinking about, I have so many ideas and thinking, I'm on this project, that project. Actually, you know what? It's quite good to go, breathe for a second, stop. Like in Suzuki, stillness, stop at the moment, be in this moment. Because sometimes I feel in life, and I think in the arts, we so need, we need to make money, we want to create, that we're always we're not really there. Maybe we could, I'm not discounting everything, what you've just said, and I believe in that as well. But at the same time, let's go, well, actually, okay, the financial thing's a different issue, and I'm not denying that. I'm not talking about the financial because that is a totally different issue. And I don't think I have, I don't think I can comment on that because everyone's situation is different. And it's a big problem, no question about it. I can't, I'm talking more about on an ideological, creative spirit level as artists. That's, where I always come from.
Certainly. And Deborah, if you wouldn't mind, we asked Deborah to share with us a piece of writing, that has resonated with her in these times. And I think this would be the ideal moment to share that with us, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, so this is a poem of that book, Judith Molina. So Judith Molina ran and started the Living Theatre, and it was a very political theatre. She also came from, I think she was born in 1926, Eastern Europe, and came to New York and started that. And she was in classes with people like, I think, what did she say, Marlon Brando, all these incredible sort of classes. But she decided she wanted to make theatre that direct and political theatre. I was very lucky to meet her just before she died, which was a few years ago. And I remember being taken to her house, and she was sitting there with her big tank of oxygen. And, she didn't know me before this, but, when you connect with someone, it was, I don't know what it was this incredibly special moment in my life. It was a connection that, I don't know, we just understood each other. There was something very special. So she took both my hands. She was very frail. She took both my hands, and then she looked me directly in the eye. And the reason, and anyway, she said, what did she say? I wrote down, Deborah, just keep doing what you're doing. You have to keep making work. And I think that is so potent in what we're just talking about now. She just held me, and she held my eyes for so longer. I couldn't breathe. It was, one of these, it to me, that is like a little encapsulation of what is happening right now creatively for me. And I hope, maybe other artists, as an artist, you've got to keep, it's a moment. Just, look me in the eyes. You've got to keep doing what you're doing. And, so anyway, she gave me this book. She gave me a few books. She was so gorgeous. But this is something she wrote, and it's called Fragile Ishmael Prediction. And it goes, are we beginning to realize how fragile we are? And is this realization beginning to lead us to wisdom? Perhaps predicting evil hastens and furthers the end it describes. Therefore, I will not predict evil, but encounter my brother Ishmael, stretching my conscience towards my fear of his violence, and I will disarm him. Or I will not disarm him, but since I won't predict evil, I say that I will disarm him. Are we together in this? How fragile are we? We are beginning to realize. So I think I feel like it just, for me, sums up all those feelings I've had of like, no, I won't predict evil, but we are fragile. But let's disarm the evil, and let's realize as human beings we are fragile. But we can keep going.
Certainly.
That's what so that really
thank you so much.
Resonated.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, this has been incredibly insightful, and I'm sure all the listeners could also agree that it's it's definitely extremely hopeful, to hear this, especially in a time like this, a time of uncertainty. But I am with you in that I am certain that, while we might not know what a year from now will look like.
But did we ever? That's the whole thing, I think. Did we ever? And look at the world. The world has, gone through incredibly crazy, dark times.
Yeah.
But here we are. The arts are still here. And if you think about it, I mean, I've been working with the theatre here. We've been trying the last years to curate a program called Art in the Time, Resistance and Resilience, or Art Created in the Time of Resistance and Resilience. And if we go back and look at that art, extraordinary art, beautiful music created out of the most dire, terrible conditions. And as I said, do we ever know what's going to happen next year? The beauty of Suzuki be in this moment, in this moment, in this moment, in each moment. So
definitely being in the moment.
Be in the moment, that was.
Being in the moment.
And then you engage.
Yeah. So.
Hi.
Hi, Deborah. Sorry. So we do have a few questions. Unfortunately, we can't see them. I can't see them here, but a colleague of mine just got in touch. Heshma Vignaraj has asked what sort of advice you would have for a dance theatre company to keep the spirit of theatre alive in times like this, especially when they can't meet in person.
Yeah, I mean, look, it depends on what they do. I mean, as I said, we're going to be working, is the choreography, the other colleague of mine, Israel and Luke and myself, where we create tasks for each other online and work them out. And then we'll, that's a simple answer, I guess. It's a simple problem solver where we'll then talk to each other. We'll be together on Zoom or whatever format, and tasks that then we have to do by ourselves and then give it to each other when we actually meet again online, which then can hopefully be taken into the rehearsal space once we're back. However, I mean, I don't know what it's like there, but here now we can actually go outside and, a number of people can go outside. I think it could be really interesting that, a few people can be in different spaces, outside and work. It really depends where you are and what the restrictions are. I did see a lovely version of, was it Cabaret, and it was one of the famous musicals in New York on Broadway. And what they'd done, they'd taken one of the songs and they'd had old cast members and new cast members, and they'd all kind of basically filmed a part of it in a different location, and they put it together as one song. It was fabulous. And that was incredibly, I think in terms we were talking about before about cheapen, this was not that at all. It was beautifully done. Dance, there are many ways here. People are going back to, 10 of them into the football. They can do that. Why can't dance companies do that? But again, I don't know if you're in Sri Lanka and what the restrictions are for each particular place. I just think we've got to keep practice though. We've got to keep our practice up every day. If you're in your home, each dancer has to do their things, has to do their own ways. Maybe they can make little films. I made a little 1-minute film actually just by chance. There are different forms that we can use, not film where you're just doing a rehearsal, but how do we think differently about it?
Right.
But we keep doing, like in a way, keep the practice, not in terms of product, but practice.
So.
I don't know if that helps, but it's a different, it's very specific. I don't think I could necessarily say what people need to do. I can only suggest what I can do.
Sure. Deborah, thank you so much once more. We well exceeded the time limit, but I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. And thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. All the best with everything, and let's have another chat maybe in a year, and let's see where we've moved on to, what theatre has become.
I'll be in Sri Lanka before then. Let's hope.
Certainly.